Let's just lay the cards out on the table, shall we? The West, armed to the teeth with drones, sanctions, alliances, and media megaphones, has tried every trick in the geopolitical handbook to bring Iran to its knees. Economic blockades, cyber attacks, political isolation, assassination of top generals, you name it. And yet Iran, defiant, scarred, and still standing, refuses to buckle. Why? Because Iran isn't just a country. It's a conviction wrapped in a culture thousands of years deep. You don't defeat that with billion-dollar jets or press conferences. Let's not kid ourselves. The West has toppled regimes with half the effort it's thrown at Iran. Iraq fell in weeks. Libya descended into chaos in days. Afghanistan. Well, we all know how that ended. 20 years, trillions spent, and the Taliban walked back and they never left. But Iran is different. Iran is built differently. You can hear it in the voice of the people. You can see it in the clenched fists of the youth marching through the streets of Tehran. Not just against their own regime at times, but always with one unified roar when an outsider threatens their soil. That's the key difference. When bombs drop and threats loom, Iran becomes what the West cannot comprehend: united. Because this is a nation born not just of revolution, but of resistance. A country that's been sanctioned, bombarded, and demonized, yet still manages to build its own drones, enrich uranium, and project power across the region like an immovable chess piece. Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen. Whether you like it or not, Iranian influence is stitched into the very fabric of Middle Eastern geopolitics. Let me tell you something the mainstream media and polished diplomats won't dare say out loud, because they're too busy appeasing audiences or tiptoeing around political correctness. Iran's greatest weapon isn't its missiles or uranium enrichment facilities. It's not the Revolutionary Guard, nor its proxy armies stretching across the Middle East. No, Iran's unbreakable strength lies in something far more dangerous and far more difficult to defeat: its resilience and unity in the face of foreign pressure. Now, before you roll your eyes and jump to conclusions about this being some soft-handed praise of a regime, let's get this clear: this isn't about defending governments. It's about understanding people, understanding nations, understanding why, despite relentless pressure, Iran refuses to fall apart the way others have. And the answer is stunningly simple: Iranians, whatever their internal divisions, come together when their sovereignty is challenged. You can stand in Tehran and see it in the eyes of the taxi driver, the university student, the grandmother in the corner store. This deep, simmering refusal to be humiliated. This instinctive pride that kicks in not when they're talking about politics, but when they're talking about foreign hands meddling in their affairs. That's when everything changes. That's when the arguments stop and the fists tighten. This is a country that has known pain, real generational pain. From the 1953 coup, when their democratically elected leader was overthrown by Western powers, to the 8-year war with Saddam Hussein. Backed, of course, by many in the West, Iran has been stabbed, bombed, starved, and sanctioned, and yet it's still here. Not just surviving, but pushing back. You don't find that kind of resilience in nations built on comfort. You find it in countries that have been forged in fire, where every family has buried someone taken too soon, where memory isn't just historical, it's personal. That collective trauma becomes armor. And in Iran, it binds people together in ways the West just doesn't understand. Because in the West, we've become obsessed with convenience. If Wi-Fi drops for 10 minutes, we spiral into panic. If petrol goes up 10 pence, there's a meltdown. But in Iran, they've faced shortages of fuel, food, medicine. They've lived under punishing sanctions, watched their currency collapse, and endured the psychological warfare of being brand a pariah on the world stage. And through all of this, they still haven't caved in. This isn't because they all support their leaders. Far from it. You can see the protests, the demands for reform, the fierce internal debates that rage online and offline. But the critical distinction is this: criticizing your government doesn't mean surrendering your nation to foreign domination. Iranians draw that line with absolute clarity. You may protest on Monday, but come Tuesday, if the country is threatened by an outside force, you'll march shoulder to shoulder with those you opposed the day before. That's unity, not blind loyalty. not fear, but unity built on the knowledge, whatever flaws exist within, they are nothing compared to the humiliation of being dictated to from outside. The West, with its short attention span and simplistic narratives, can't wrap its head around this. It expects people to choose you're either anti-government or anti-West. But in Iran, they've mastered the ability to be both. Fiercely critical of their own rulers, yet completely opposed to outside interference. That's the kind of maturity and layered thinking we rarely see in sanitized media coverage. And here's the brutal truthing. The more the West tries to fracture this unity through economic warfare and military threats, the more it actually consolidates it. You think bombing a general or imposing new sanctions will trigger regime collapse. Think again. All it does is light a new fire in the hearts of the people. Because now it's not just about politics. It's about dignity. Walk through any Iranian city and you'll hear stories of sacrifice, of soldiers lost in war, of lives lost under sanctions. And through every story is this unshakable belief we don't kneel to outsiders. That belief is more powerful than any drone strike, more enduring than any embargo. And let's not forget the role of culture. Iran isn't some dusty, backward outpost. It's one of the oldest civilizations on the planet. Persian poetry, architecture, music, and language have survived empires. This is a people who've seen conquerors come and go. Alexander, the Mongols, the Ottomans, the British, the Americans. And they're still standing. You don't erase that kind of legacy with a UN resolution. So while Western powers may pat themselves on the back for their latest economic measure or diplomatic snub, Iran simply adapts, moves on, Vince. But it never forgets, and it never breaks. This is what makes Iran unique. It's not just about politics or religion or ideology. It's about a collective psyche that refuses to be colonized, refuses to be broken, and above all, refuses to be told who they are by anyone outside their borders. That's why Iran is still here. That's why it won't fall. And that's exactly why, after decades of trying, the West still can't defeat it. Let's cut through the noise and get brutally honest for a moment. The West, led by its smug politicians, well-fed think tanks, and keyboard warrior strategists, has launched every imaginable assault against Iran short of full-scale war. And what has it achieved? Precisely nothing. If anything, every move they've made has backfired spectacularly. Because for all the bravado and chest thumping, the hard truth is this: Western tactics have failed. Repeatedly, miserably, embarrassingly. Let's rewind to what they love calling the maximum pressure campaign, a term so pompous it might as well have been ripped from a Hollywood action script. Sanctions on oil, sanctions on banking, sanctions on medicine, yes, medicine, entire financial systems locked out, Iranian passports weakened, foreign assets frozen like they belonged to pirates. It was supposed to be the final blow, the knockout punch. But guess what? Iran's still standing. Battered, maybe, but broken. Not even close. In fact, let's be honest, it's hard to find a campaign so maximum in name yet so minimal in actual results. The point of sanctions, according to the Western gospel, is to cause enough economic pain to either incite rebellion from within or force the regime to crawl back to the negotiating table, hat in hand. But what happened instead? The Iranian economy, while strained, adapted. Underground markets bloomed. Trade shifted eastward. Barter systems replaced wire transfers. And Iran began building things itself, things it once imported. Necessity, as they say, is the mother of invention, and nowhere is that more visible than in today's Iran. A country sanctioned into a corner has started producing drones that rival Western tech, missiles that reach further than they should, fuel, pharmaceuticals, even advanced military equipment, all developed not because Iran wanted to, but because the West left them no other choice. So, well done, folks. You've essentially turned a previously dependent economy into one that's slowly mastering its own survival toolkit. And not just that, it's now exporting its innovations to allies and proxies, giving rise to an entire resistance economy, model that others are beginning to study. Take the cyber war, for instance. Remember Stuxnet, the digital equivalent of a James Bond plot, sophisticated, precise, targeted. It was supposed to halt Iran's nuclear program in its tracks. Did it slow them down? Sure. But did it stop them? Absolutely not. Within a year, they'd patched the hole, figured out who was behind it, and ramped up development. The response wasn't a white flag, it was retaliation, cyber attacks on foreign infrastructure, fuel distribution systems, even oil pipelines. The student became the teacher. Iran, once the target of digital warfare, became a player in the same field. Another Western tactic that's simply boomerang. And what about the assassination strategy? The West and its allies thought removing high-profile figures would leave the structure shaky. They called Qasem Soleimani's assassination a game changer. Yes, a game changer, if the goal was to unite millions of Iranians under one flag. Regardless of their political views, his funeral was attended by millions, not because every Iranian agreed with him, but because they saw an attack on a national figure as an attack on the nation itself. That's the lesson the West never seems to grasp. Their actions don't isolate the government from its people. They often achieve the exact opposite. When you attack a symbol, you don't dismantle a regime. You inflame nationalism. You trigger memory, you ignite pride. And while we're on the subject of tactics, let's talk about diplomacy. The nuclear deal, or the JCPOA, was a rare moment of sanity. It worked. Iran slowed its enrichment. Inspectors got in. Everyone exhaled. And then the Trump administration, in its infinite wisdom, decided to scrap it. For no good reason, other than wanting to look tough. Well, congratulations, the deal collapsed, Iran ramped up its program again, and the diplomatic bridge was torched. Once more, a tactical own goal. Here's the inconvenient truth no one in the corridors of Washington or Brussels wants to admit. You can't bully a country into submission when its very identity is built on surviving bullies. You can't isolate a nation that already lives like an island. And you can't defeat a mindset that turns every external blow into internal fuel. Every failed tactic reveals the same thing. The West doesn't understand the terrain it's fighting on. It plays chess while Iran plays go, slow, patient, calculated moves that aren't about flashy wins, but about positioning and longevity. And while the West keeps refreshing sanctions lists and signing off on covert operations, Iran is digging deeper, building more, becoming less dependent, not just enduring the pressure, but evolving because of it. So let's stop pretending this is a waiting game where one more sanction, one more targeted strike, one more lecture at the UN will suddenly bring the curtain down on the Islamic Republic, because that fantasy has been peddled for 40 years now, and Iran, still here, still defiant, still a step ahead of every tactic thrown its way. The West wanted compliance. What it got was resistance, and the scoreboard speaks for itself. Let's talk about something that makes Western politicians squirm in their tailored suits and glossy sound bites, the sheer indestructible force of ideology and historical memory. Because here's the bottom lining: while the West tries to measure victory in contracts signed and oil secured, Iran measures it in something far more powerful. Dignity, martyrdom, sacrifice, and unshakable pride. And that's the battlefield where the West is hopelessly outmatched. See, this isn't just about weapons or sanctions. It's not even just about religion, though that plays a part. This is about identity, about a nation that sees itself not as a pawn in a global game, but as the spiritual hero of empires, revolutionaries, and yes, victims of betrayal. Iran doesn't forget, and it sure as hell doesn't forgive. Every time the West makes a move, Iran's response isn't just strategic. It's emotional. It's historical. It's personal. Let me explain something most Western leaders have either ignored or misunderstood for decades. You can't kill an idea with a drone. You can't assassinate conviction. You can't airstrike legacy. When Qasem Soleimani was taken out, the West cheered as though this was the final boss in some video game. They thought decapitation would bring confusion, a collapse, maybe even a coup. Instead, they got millions flooding the streets, chanting his name, mourning not a general, but a symbol. A man woven into their narrative of resistance, defiance, and eternal struggle. You see, Iran doesn't raise its heroes in the sterile corridors of politics. It forgets them on battlefields, in prison cells under sanctions, and amidst rubble. These aren't Instagram politicians posing for photo ops. These are figures etched into memory. And when they fall, they don't vanish. They become martyrs, living legends. eternal reminders of injustice and the fight against it. Now let's talk about 1953, a year etched in the Iranian soul like a scar that never quite heals. The West, America and Britain specifically, overthrew Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, because he dared to nationalize Iranian oil. Oil, mind you, that the British were quite happily plundering for decades. And in came the CIA Operation Ajax, toppling a sovereign leader to reinstall a monarchy that bled the country dry. Iranians haven't forgotten that. They teach it in schools. It's embedded in their very understanding of what the West is capable of. And it fuels every ounce of skepticism, every defiant gesture, every policy of distrust that comes out of Tehran. So when a Western diplomat rolls up, smiling and offering a new partnership, the Iranians smile back. But they remember, when they hear words like freedom and democracy from the same mouths that armed Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq War, they don't flinch. They brace. Because their ideology isn't shaped by headlines. It's shaped by betrayal. And this is precisely why they are so dangerous to Western powers. Not because they have the biggest bombs, but because they believe, really truly believe, in martyrdom, in resistance, in a moral cause that transcends time, wealth, and diplomacy. They don't fear death. They fear dishonor. And that makes them uniquely unbreakable. Meanwhile, the West can't even keep its own narratives straight. One administration negotiates a nuclear deal, the next tears it up. One supports a regime change, the next begs for talks. Iran watches this circus unfold and knows exactly what it means that the West fights for votes, for headlines, for quarterly approval ratings. Iran fights for something far deeper, for what it sees as justice, redemption, and legacy. And here's the problem. Western strategy has no counter for that kind of psychological armor. You can't sanction martyrdom. You can't drone strike pride. You can't control a people who are willing to endure suffering if they believe it gives meaning to their struggle. Iran doesn't just endure pain, it turns it into political currency. When Iranian leaders speak to their people, they don't sell comfort or convenience. They invoke Karbala. They invoke the Prophet's family. They remind the pub that every hardship is a step toward divine reward, national dignity, or historical justice. That's a language most Western governments have no vocabulary for, let alone any ability to combat. And what's more damning, this ideology isn't just limited to Iran's borders. It spreads. It finds fertile ground in Baghdad, Beirut, Damascus, Sana'a. It galvanizes those who feel ignored, oppressed, exploited by the same global order Iran defies. While the West talks about diplomacy, Iran builds loyalty. While others build embassies, Iran builds networks. That's the power of an idea rooted in memory. So, while the West keeps playing the same tired game of carrot and stick, Iran continues to outmaneuver them, not with superior firepower or economic might, but with sheer ideological momentum. The West wants results in quarters. Iran thinks in centuries. And until policymakers finally wake up and realize that you can't bomb history out of people's bones, Iran will remain not only undefeated, but untouchable. Because in a world where most nations crumble under pressure, Iran doesn't just survive, it grows stronger in defiance. Not because it's invincible, but because it believes it has nothing to lose and everything to die for. If you think Iran's power ends at its borders, you've not been paying attention. This isn't some isolated state clutching onto power in the shadows of ancient ruins. Iran is a regional titan, like it or not, and its influence, its real, tangible, strategic reach, spreads like wildfire across the Middle East. This isn't about armies rolling over borders. This is about networks, proxies, ideology, logistics, and patience. And the West, with all its military budgets and diplomatic swagger, has repeatedly underestimated just how deeply entrenched Iran has become across this volatile, crucial region. Let's get something straight. Iran didn't become a regional power by fluke. It wasn't handed influence on a silver platter. It earned it in the blood-stained chaos left behind by one Western blunder after another. The 2003 invasion of Iraq, a geopolitical gift to Tehran. Saddam Hussein, one of Iran's fiercest enemies, was removed by the United States. And what did Iran do? Sit back and clap? No, it slipped in quietly, strategically, like a chess master seeing the board wide open. It built alliances, funded militias, and embedded itself in the very institutions the West tried to set up. Now, Iraq is more than just a neighbor. It's practically a second home for Iranian influence. Its politics, heavily shaped by Tehran, its militias, many trained, armed, and guided by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And when push comes to shove, they answer to Qum and Tehran just as much, if not more, than they do to Baghdad. That's not just power. That's control with plausible deniability. And it doesn't stop there. Let's talk about Hezbollah in Lebanon. A group born in the rubble of Israeli occupation and nurtured by Iranian funding and ideology. Hezbollah isn't some ragtag militia hiding in mountain caves. It's a disciplined, battle-hardened political and military force that has held its ground against one of the most sophisticated armies in the region, Israel. And who backs them financially, militarily, and ideologically? Iran. When Israeli warplanes buzz the skies over Beirut, it's not just a message to Lebanon, it's a warning to Tehran. Because everyone in that chess game knows Hezbollah isn't acting alone. It's part of Iran's regional architecture. A living, breathing reminder that Iran's reach isn't limited by maps. It's fluid, it's flexible, it's fearless. Now let's head to Syria, where another disaster of Western foreign policy opened the door wide for Iran. As the Assad regime teetered on the brink during the Syrian civil war, Iran didn't flinch. It didn't waver, it doubled down. Advisors, fighters, weapons, money, it all poured in to keep Bashar al-Assad afloat. Again, not because Iran necessarily loves Assad, but because chaos is opportunity, and stability under a loyal partner is better than a Western-backed regime change. And then there's Yemen, the poorest country in the Arab world, yet somehow now a battleground in the Cold War between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The Houthis, backed and supported by Tehran, have become a thorn in the side of Riyadh, and by extension, Washington. Every missile that lands in Saudi territory isn't just a military strike. It's a message Iran can light a fire on your doorstep without ever leaving Tehran. So when Western leaders arrogantly declare that Iran is isolated, I genuinely wonder what planet they're living on. Isolated. Iran has built a spider web of influence that spans every major flashpoint in the Middle East. And the beauty of it, from Tehran's point of view, is that it doesn't need to put boots on the ground to make noise. It doesn't need aircraft carriers. It has partners, clients, proxies, groups that are ideologically aligned, operationally trained, and strategically useful. This is warfare for the 21st century. No uniforms, no declarations, just strategy, influence, longevity, and the ability to bleed your enemies without even engaging them directly. Meanwhile, the West is stuck playing a game it doesn't understand. It still sees power as how many jets you can launch or how many bases you can build. Iran sees power as influence, deep, ideological, slow-burning influence that can't be sanctioned, bombed, or negotiated away. And that, frankly, is why Iran is winning. Not because it's richer, not because it's stronger on paper, but because it knows how to weave itself into the fabric of regional politics. Because it plays the long game, not the election cycle game. And because when it backs a group, it backs them fully with resources, strategy, and a vision that transcends immediate gains. So yes, while the West blusters about containing Iran, Iran is doing what it's always done, outlasting, outmaneuvering, and embedding itself even deeper into the very places the West tried to dominate. This isn't just regional power. It's strategic genius disguised under decades of survival and sanctified by a population that refuses to bow. While Washington and Brussels talk in polished platitudes, Iran acts calculated, relentless, and always 5 moves ahead. That's not a weakness, that's a warning. Let me say it bluntly. Iran is not afraid of war. It's not itching for one either, but let's not delude ourselves if push comes to shove, if the bombs start falling, if the missiles light up the sky, Iran will fight. And not only will it fight, it will bleed, it will resist, and it will retaliate with a ferocity the West simply isn't prepared for. Because this isn't a country that's counting victories in gold reserves or foreign investments. Iran counts victories in resilience, in survival, in how many times it's been pushed to the brink and come back swinging harder than before. This is where the West has miscalculated so catastrophically. They look at Iran's aging infrastructure, its battered currency, its long list of enemies, and they see a country on the verge of collapse. But what they fail to understand, what they've always failed to understand, is that Iran thrives in adversity. It's been forged in conflict, raised on struggle. The war with Iraq in the 1980s killed hundreds of thousands, cost billions, and devastated cities. And yet Iran didn't fall, it dug in, it adapted, it held the line against a Western-armed Saddam Hussein for 8 brutal years. That war wasn't just fought on the battlefield. It was imprinted on Iran's national psyche. It shaped generations. It created a culture that sees suffering not as weakness, but as a rite of passage, a test, a validation of endurance. So while the West trains its soldiers in climate-controlled bases and high-tech simulators, Iran trains its youth in memory of loss, of resistance, of never giving up even when the odds are stacked 10-1. Let's also get real about something else. If war breaks out today, it won't be a shock and a why, cakewalk like Iraq or Libya. Iran is not a pushover state. Its geography alone makes it a nightmare to invade. Vast mountain ranges, narrow straits, dense cities, and a population that's more unified by external threat than any internal ideology. The Strait of Hormuz. Shut that down, and 30% of the world's oil supply is suddenly at risk. One missile, one mine, one fast attack boat, and the entire global economy gets a wake-up call. And if you think Iran will sit there politely while being bombed, think again. It has ballistic missiles, thousands of them. It has drones, cheap, effective, swarming little devils that have already proven themselves on battlefields from Syria to Ukraine. It has cyber capabilities that can wreak havoc on power grids, pipelines, and military systems. This is not guesswork, this is proven. And more importantly, it has allies, partners, and proxies ready to ignite costs from Lebanon to Yemen, from Iraq to Gaza. An attack on Iran doesn't stay in Iran. It ripples out across the region like wildfire on dry grass. So let's drop the fantasy that regime change will come with a few surgical strikes and a glamorous CN headline. Any military action against Iran will trigger a regional conflict, one that will make Afghanistan and Iraq like warm-ups. The cost in lives, resources, and geopolitical stability would be catastrophic. Not just for Iran, but for the West as well. And Iran knows this. It counts on this. That's why Iran has invested not in matching the West's military might plane for plane or tank for tank, but in asymmetry. Guerrilla tactics, naval harassment, proxy warfare, economic warfare, psychological warfare. It's turned every weakness into a weapon. Sanctions have starved it of imports. It builds its own. Isolation cut it off from global markets. It creates its own alliances. China, Russia, Latin America, even trade deals in Africa. The West tries to isolate and Iran circumvents. It adapts like a virus, learning from every attempt to contain it. And let's not overlook the internal aspect here. You bomb Iran, and you may destabilize the regime temporarily, but you ignite the population. Even dissidents who despise the clerical establishment suddenly rally around the flag when foreign bombs fall. Nationalism in Iran isn't just strong, it's feral when provoked. For decades, the West has relied on the myth that Iranians will up against their own government if pushed hard enough. But every time the pressure escalates, the opposite happens. They don't break, they unify, because deep down they remember one thing: foreign interference never ends well. Iran plays the long game, always has. And when war seems like a looming threat, it doesn't panic. It prepares, it tunnels, it disperses weapons. It drills its militias. It reinforces its ideology. This is not a nation that crumbles under fire. This is a nation that's been expecting fire since 1979. So to the suits in Washington, London, and Brussels, constantly whispering about contingency plans and surgical options, be careful. You may think you're facing just another Middle Eastern adversary, but you're not. You're facing a country that has made survival an art form, that's been hardened by sanctions, emboldened by defiance, and baptized in war. Iran isn't untouchable, but it is unconquerable. And that's the mistake every empire has made when trying to bring it to heel. Because Iran doesn't just endure war, it absorbs it. And then, like it always has, it outlasts its enemies, one generation at a time.